Urban planning may not seem like a major issue at first glance, with other problems taking the spotlight. But with further examination, it proves to be a really important and decisive issue that will determine the future of humanity. Our future is in our hands, and with more focus and attention on urban planning, we can make it a better future worth for the coming generations. Urban planning is connected with many other issues and themes, such as urban sprawl, overpopulation, pollution, and sustainability. But most of all, it connects to affordable housing. Urban planning even goes further than just connecting to affordable housing. It creates or destroys it. And why is affordable housing so important, you might ask? Well, when citizens have access to affordable housing, they can reach their full potentials and become contributing members of society without spending 80 to 90% of their income on housing costs and worrying about finding housing or paying rent. Likewise, my thesis for this project states, urban planning is crucial for affordable housing, which ensures that all citizens have access to adequate housing. This ultimately can create an environment where all citizens can become contributing members of society. Currently, around the world, there are both bad and good examples of urban planning, which in turn cause affordable and unaffordable housing markets. This means that, currently in the world, there are some countries that reach their full potentials and some that don't. If done well, urban planning can make the future world into a place where no one is living in slums and everyone has access to adequate and affordable housing. This will mean that everyone will have the chance to reach their full potential and focus on making the world a better place and pushing humanity into the next century. This documentary will look into 4 different housing situations around the world and connect them to urban planning while explaining each of their individual causes. It is more expensive to live in Hong Kong than any other place in the world. Hong Kong has been ranked as the least affordable housing market for 10 years in a row, and by a long shot. As seen on this graph, Hong Kong is ranked first with a score of 20.9, meaning that an average household making $50,000 a year would be looking at a house costing $1 million. To put things into perspective, in Hong Kong, a worker earning twice the city's average income would have to work for 21 years to afford a 650 square meter house. Now hundreds of thousands of residents in Hong Kong have to squeeze in homes the size of an average US car parking spot. These are called cage homes. They barely fit one person and their belongings. Another popular strategy to cope with this situation is the subdivided house model, where the residents get one big flat and divide it into a bunch of tiny little flats, making a space originally designed for one family to live in, a place where 3 to 4 families live together. These small flats basically have space for a bed, a table, and a few belongings. What makes this model work is that they have a bigger communal space where they are able to have their cooking, washing, and bathroom open to everyone living in that subdivided flat, so that they can save money and space from their actual living quarters. The tempting explanation for why the prices are so high is land scarcity, which seems true. 7.5 million people squeeze into a series of islands. It is going to drive up the prices, which is true in many places around the world, such as New York City, San Francisco, or London. But is Hong Kong actually running out of land? When looking at aerial footage of Hong Kong, we can see that, well, yes, there is a very dense urban landscape. There is also a whole lot of green space. Government land use data says that 75.6% of the land in Hong Kong is not developed. Now, some of the land is steep, mountainous, and not easy to build on, but certainly not all non-developed land is like that. The problem here is not land scarcity, it is bad land management, says John Wright, a chair in the non-profit community organization Friends of Sai Kung, and a 30-year Hong Kong resident. Of all the land in Hong Kong, only 3.7% of it is devoted to high-density urban housing. But this is not because of mountains, it is because of policy. In Hong Kong, all the land is owned by the government. The government leases out the land to developers for usually 50 years in an auction process, where the highest bidder gets the land. However, due to land zoned for housing being in such limited supply, the developers, now more and more coming from mainland China with big amounts of money, fight for these plots of land, raising the prices to astronomically high amounts. The second part of the explanation is taxes. Hong Kong loves low taxes. The corporate tax is low, no value-added tax, no sales tax. These things are embedded into the framework of Hong Kong. So the government can't make its money from taxes. It needs another source of making money. In the case of Hong Kong, this source is land leases. Nearly 30% of the government revenue comes from land leases. The government can sell these plots of land for astronomically high prices and make a ton of money, thus be able to keep the corporate taxes low. While Hong Kong proudly maintains its position as the freest economy in the world, its citizens suffer because of the unavailability of affordable housing. Even though year after year new policies come in that aim to fix this problem, none actually work. This is because the government doesn't have a huge incentive to fix the problem, as they earn a big portion of their income from land sales. What would really work is a government policy that will put the interest of its people above the interest of the market. The government should devote more land to high-density residential use and open more of the non-developed land for development. However, until the government can make that happen, the people of Hong Kong will squeeze into smaller and smaller spaces. India, currently with a population of 1.4 billion, is projected to overtake China in just 7 years in 2027. This, coupled with a massive migration into cities from rural landscapes, created massive slums in the biggest cities of India. Now, nearly every major city in India has one or more areas that are classified as slums. In addition, one of the world's biggest slums, known as Dharavi, housing 1 million people, is located in Mumbai, the country's financial capital and second largest city. According to the UN, 24% of Indians living in urban settings are living in slums, which is about 100 million people. These people live in extremely crowded living quarters, with sometimes 7 people per room living together. 41% of these households make between 78 to $155 a month, barely affording water, food and other necessary supplies. The government, in an attempt to rectify this situation, is giving out land to slum dwellers. Not in the central area of the city where slums tend to be, but on the urban outskirts. However, the strategy is not working, as stated by Saudamini Das, a researcher with the Institute of Economic Growth in New Delhi. Those who are relocated aren't able to secure jobs outside the city, she says. They end up selling the land or giving it to relatives and returning to more centrally located slums. Das's recent research proves that slum dwellers value the location of their housing more than the quality of living. After all, these people are people who have migrated into bigger cities seeking better job opportunities, with India's cities not offering good public transportation links. between the outer city and the inner city. These people that don't have many resources in hand have to find somewhere to live near their jobs in the city center. But the housing market can't cope with the rapidly increasing demand and rapidly decreasing available land. The best solution for this issue would be for the government to improve services such as drainage, sewage, and water distribution. As research says that when these factors are improved, the residents will be willing to pay for them. Additionally, the funds collected from these systems can be used for the implementation of the same systems in many other slums around India. The researchers also advocate for the government to give the land surrounding their homes to the slum dwellers. One reason people throw garbage next to their houses in the slums is that the land doesn't matter to them, Das says. There, what belongs to you is inside the walls of your home. If slum dwellers are given more official rights to the land, such practices could change. People would feel ownership of the space. Many cities in India can't get rid of slums, so why not embrace and improve them? Currently in Brazil, there are more than 12 million people living in slums, which are known as favelas. This accounts for more than 6% of the total population of Brazil. In Rio de Janeiro alone, 1.5 million people live in favelas, accounting for 25% of the city's population. Because of the non-existent presence of police and government, many of these favelas around Brazil are run by drug trafficking cartels, the most notable one being the Red Command. Even though, in 2008, the government and the Brazilian police intervened in the operations of these drug cartels in some of the favelas, many cartels are still in control today. The main cause of this issue is slavery. Brazil imported 11 times more slaves than the US. Rio alone was home to more slaves than the entire American South at one point. Slavery ended in 1888, and the now free slaves, still denied many freedoms in public, couldn't find affordable housing in the cities, so they built their own informal settlements on the outskirts of the cities. In recent years, the favelas have been fueled by rural Brazilians coming into the city for better job opportunities, looking for affordable housing options. Not able to find affordable housing, these workers built their own housing on the outskirts of the cities. In 2016, when Rio hosted the Olympics, the government built huge walls and structures around the highways that passed through favelas and cancelled the bus lines that ran from the outer city areas where lower income people resided into the city center to hide the dark side of Brazil from the foreigners who were coming for the Olympic Games. Some possible steps for solving this issue include providing the residents of the favelas with better systems such as sewage, drainage, water distribution, electricity, garbage collection, and cable TV connection. Connecting favelas to the city center with better public transportation options, allowing people to get better job opportunities. Giving the land to the favela dwellers that live on it for them to take better care of it. And lastly, giving land away from the favela to the favela residents and providing them with low-interest loans so that they can build their own permanent homes out of proper materials such as bricks and concrete. When looking through a local lens, we can see that Singapore has coped with the increasing housing demand very well and has thoroughly implemented urban planning into its new projects. In Singapore, 80% of the population lives in public housing units, as opposed to just 9% in 1959. Why has Singapore succeeded while others didn't? The answer comes down to four main reasons. Number one, the importance of neighborhoods. Singapore, differing from the other countries, built up whole new neighborhoods around these new government-built public housing units. They made it so that each household has access to good and well-maintained education, shopping malls, sports facilities, green spaces, and public transportation links. Number two, the smart use of urban density. Singapore is small in land area, so the officials decided to build up rather than building sideways and expanding the city to create an endless urban sprawl. Buildings are also interspaced with high-quality green open spaces. Since the very beginning, Prime Minister Lee Kuan Yew laid the highest emphasis on Singapore being a garden city. Number three, an integrated approach to housing. In Singapore, the government owns 90% of the land. In comparison, the government owned 49% of the land in 1965. Singapore has also managed the contracting and construction of these public houses very well. In 1989, 2 councils were introduced to manage the public housing estates in Singapore. Currently, there are 16 of these councils. And lastly, number 4, strong and prominent political support. The popular and political support for public housing in Singapore is strong and stable. This has meant a high level of public subsidies to the public housing. In 2017, this was 1.2 billion Singaporean dollars. As seen from the example of Singapore, it is possible to achieve prosperous public housing. It is more importantly seen that when citizens have access to adequate and affordable housing, it ultimately creates an environment where all citizens can become contributing members of society, just as stated in my thesis statement. When looking at Singapore's gross domestic product per capita, gross national income per capita, and Human Development Index ranking, it can be seen that Singapore has created an environment where all citizens reach their full potentials and are contributing members of the society by providing them with adequate and affordable housing, thus proving my thesis. When looking through my personal lens, I can see that I have learned quite a lot in the making of this project, which affected my personal perspective. I have learned about the different housing crises around the world, why they happened, the current situations, and their potential solutions. I have learned that it is possible to build prosperous public housing, that it is possible to prevent these kinds of housing crises around the world, and learned how different governments are coping with their housing crises. I have learned that my thesis is true, and thus I achieved my goal of confirming the accuracy of my thesis. I found research and scriptwriting to be the hardest and most time-consuming factors in the making of my project, while I found editing and finding fitting music for my documentary the easiest and most fun aspects of the whole project. It was surprising to learn how many people lived in different slums around the world, and it was hopeful to learn about the different efforts made by both governments and non-governmental organizations. This project has taught me the importance of time management in general, and the importance of preparation and planning before starting a project. This affected my personal lens in a way that now I understand how the situations came to be, and I understand the circumstances the people live under in the different examples I looked into. I, along with many other people around the world, used to view the people who live in slums as poor people. But after this project, my personal perspective on this matter changed. Now I understand how they feel, what hardships they go through, and the hard choices they have to make. In conclusion, from the many examples we looked into, we can see that urban planning plays a huge role in supplying people with adequate and affordable housing. In some parts of the world, it is done well, while in some parts it is not. However, it is evident that everywhere around the world, it requires more focus and attention. The percentage of people living in urban landscapes is only growing year by year. It is important that we focus on urban planning. Our future is in our hands, and with proper urban planning, every citizen can have access to adequate housing, which in turn will cause everyone on Earth to reach their full potentials and thrust humanity into the next century.